official Remembrance Day of the freeing of the concentration camp in Neuengamm in Hamburg, we invited you to speak with someone who survived and who will share his experiences with us. Dear Marian Hawling, I'm delighted to welcome you. You are sitting in your apartment in Sydney right now, where it is already Sunday evening, but this modern technique offers us the chance to see you, to hear you, to speak with you, which is absolutely great. Thank you so much for being here with us now, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to hear from you and to speak with you. Welcome, Marian Hawling.
Well, thank you, because my pleasure is all mine. It's all for the good cause, because we don't want people to forget about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And next to you,
I would say that was, despite the fact that I always wanted to forget about it, my visits to Neuengamm and the trip on the Kaparkon and all that were extremely, extremely pleasant and great experience, deep experience for me.
Thank you so much. Next to you, we welcome your wife, Elizabeth Hawling. Also very heartily welcome to you, Elizabeth. And I welcome Mark Hawling, your son, who set up the technique until the very last minute. Thank you that you both, Elizabeth and Mark, will join in and will also talk to us how it was for you when Marian decided, I just want to get it out of my mind, as we named this event today. Once again, I welcome Ulle Jensen, my dear colleague who was organizing this event together with us. Ulrike Jensen is a historian and works at the Neuengamm concentration camp memorial. She had the idea to this event and will take over in a second and moderate this discussion. Before that, some quick technical words from me. We record this event. We will post the video on our website in about a week, but only the people who speak will be recorded, so nobody has to be afraid that he or she will be taped on this video. We have muted all of you and asked you to keep your microphones shut during the event, but of course we invite you to join in the discussion and ask questions. Please use the chat for this. You can find it in the bottom line of your Zoom window. You can write your questions in the chat, either in English or in German language, whatever you prefer. Ulrike Jensen and I, we will read the chat and give your questions to Marian, Elizabeth, and Mark Hawling. So this is from me for the moment, and I'll hand the word over to you, Ulrike.
Thank you very much, Dietmar, and welcome all of you, especially Marian, Elizabeth, and Mark. I'm very happy to see you again. The cooperation between the Neuengamm concentration camp memorial and the Friedrich Ebert Foundation has a very long tradition. Our generation talk with survivors and their families normally takes place in attendance of a huge audience in a location in Hamburg. Because of the pandemic, we had to move it into the digital space. But anyway, we are happy that so many people decided to join our event. This year, we have also moved the starting time from evening to morning. The reason for this, Dietmar already mentioned, is that we will talk to Marian, Elizabeth, and Mark, who are living in Australia, and there it's 6 o'clock in the evening now. We are very, very happy to have you. And I'm also happy to welcome another Australian in Germany at this time, Justin Warland, who's a volunteer in the Neuengamm concentration camp memorial and who will read some passages of what Marian and Elizabeth wrote. This talk will take place in English only, so I hope you informed yourself about this beforehand. I will be happy to translate your questions if you want to post them in German. I would like to translate them to our guests. First of all, I would like to talk to our guests. And after that, you, the audience, will have the possibility to pose your questions. You can post your questions beforehand and we will collect them. And after that, we will give them on to our 3 Australian guests. Okay, I would like to start first with you, Marian. Do you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Okay. I will give a brief introduction of who you are, and then I will pose some questions to you.
Okay.
Okay. You were born...
You want me to start now?
Now, I just want to say a few words about you, and then I will have some questions. First of all, I give some information to the audience. So you were born in Lwów in Poland in 1925. And
yes.
And you were very young when you decided to take part in the resistance movement after the Germans occupied Poland in 1939. And after that, you made a real odyssey during your resistance fight, among others joining the Polish army. You went from Poland to Hungary, then to France. And from there, you wanted to go to London via Portugal, but you were caught and imprisoned, but initially released.
And I ended...
Wait on, I lost the sound. Can you hear me?
Oh. Du bist stumm gerade.
Oh yeah, we can hear you again.
It was my fault, sorry. My first question, Marian, is you were very young when you joined the resistance movement in Poland. What made you decide to wanting to resist against the German occupants?
Well, I don't know whether that was mostly patriotism or just a thing to do. Probably because there were some friends of mine about 2 years older than I, and they joined the resistance. So I did the same thing. And once I got started, once I got involved, there was no turn back.
Okay. Yeah. And Marian, your parents, you were really pretty young. What did your parents say? Were they happy?
I added 2 years to my birthday. I told them everywhere that I was born in 1923.
Uli is asking what the parents said.
No, well, when it all happened, I was on holidays just outside of Lwów with my grandparents, and my parents were in Lwów. And I just didn't tell my parents didn't know what to do. I just joined it. And anyhow, the general feeling was when we heard that England and France declare war to Germany, that there would be a victory of England. We thought the great empire. We thought it was, but it didn't turn out that way. If I would have known that, I didn't quite know what I'm getting myself involved in.
Wait for the next question.
Yeah. And then the odyssey went on. You were trying to get back to your parents, and then you were caught by the French police in Bordeaux, and they gave you over to the Germans after a long...
Did you hear what Uli said? Yeah. You were caught in France.
Yeah, that's right.
And they handed you over to the Germans.
A long bit of time has passed since, because when the front collapsed, then we were trying to smuggle people to London again, to England. And when my turn came, I was caught crossing the border illegally to Spain over the Pyrenean Mountains, and they got me, and I ended up in Spanish General Franco concentration camp in Miranda de Ebro, and I was there for nearly a year. And we didn't work there. It was just bad food and bad hygiene and nothing. But yeah. So that after that, there was still a Polish consulate in Madrid, because General Franco did not recognize the Polish occupation by Soviet Union, and we still were smuggling, and I came out of a camp because the Polish consulate got me out because of my young age. And then eventually consulate was closed, and they were kind of told, everyone help yourself now, do what you like. And I decided, yes, I'll go back to Poland. I've had enough. Yeah, and I was caught in France without documents.
And then you were brought to Berlin by the Germans. You were put into prison at Berlin Alexanderplatz first, before being transferred to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp.
Yeah, the Alexanderplatz, I was there, according to the document, on the 11th of January 1943. Mm-hmm. And I was there for about 9 or 10 days, according to the document I have. It seemed a lot longer.
Because he was in solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement. And it was...
Yeah. That seems a lot of time, even if it's only a few days when you're on your own totally. I can imagine that. And then you were put to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. And then there was a huge odyssey between the concentration camps. So from Sachsenhausen to Alderney, to Neuengamm, to Brage, to Neuengamm, back. Yeah. And I have a question, Marian, for this whole time that you were in the concentration camp, with the exception of the drowning of the Cap Arcona, we will come to that later. But with the exception of that, which experience in the concentration camps is most vivid in your memory? So what event or what experience you had in one of these camps is the one you remember most?
Did you get the question?
The question, experiences.
Which experience do you remember most of all from all your experiences in concentration camp?
Apart of Praga Verkona. Well, you mean the terrible experiences where when they were hanging people in a plot on a camp, when we used to come sometimes from work, and there was scaffolding there, and some people were being hanged, particularly after bombing of Neuengamm, of Hamburg. There was a commando there cleaning the damages, and they told them, you can find food, you can eat, but if you find some valuables and you don't hand them in, you'll hang. So we have quite a few executions, and one of them was a chap that he was maybe 2 years older than I, and we used to sit together having our soup always. And he was on a commando there, came back, and he was waiting. He knew he will be hanged. And I could see the fear in his eyes. And it could have been tomorrow, next week, or next month. And eventually he did. Some of those executions, there was another execution in Bremen-Farga, in Bunker Valenten, that the order came to execute a chap. They didn't have a proper scaffolding, so they put something together and it collapsed. And then they were starting to put it back together again, and he kept saying, "Schnell, schnell, schnell." He wanted to be done with it and be hung instead of waiting for it. So, things like that. And then again, when I joined the Leichenkammer Commando, it was a putrid smell and heaps of bodies lying there. And some of them still had their eyes open, and they look at you and you thought, they're alive. But we were loading them on a roll wagon and pushed them to the crematorium ovens, and they were being burned there. And that was, we were trying to work slow, and even the capo didn't call schnell, because we were trying to prolong to be there as long as possible before we're going to be evacuated. Yeah. And then again, when we were walking from Neuengamm to Neustadt, that was, I think, 2 nights and 3 days. And some people could not walk. And if someone couldn't walk, and he used to, assessment at the back used to come out like, aufstehen. And if he couldn't get up, if he was too tired, he used to put a bullet through his head. And on the second night, 2 young men, they said, if anyone's trying to escape, will be shot. 2 young men tried to escape. And the next morning, they were missing, so they went looking for them, and they found them. They found them in a little forest somewhere. So they brought them in, and they executed them in front of us, so that now you know what happens if you try to escape. Mm. And I could talk forever.
After what you told us, it seems like a bit weird question, but are there any events or any moments during your time in the concentration camp that you remember as good or happy or better, like, for instance, friendships or solidarity among the prisoners, or perhaps resistance against the SS orders, anything like this?
Well, I tell them about Willy.
Well, make it short.
But there is a story. I have...
Well, did that make you happy? That was just something that saved your life, I suppose.
That's something that, yes, saved my life, yeah. There was a couple in Bremer, in Bunker Valenten, and Willy, and he was a capo of all capos. All the capos respected him extremely. He was a skinny bear chop, a little bit hunchback with a very powerful voice. And we were building something, I had my collarbone. And one of the capos once pushed me, and it looked like it was going to hit me. I wasn't working hard enough, and I did kind of a movement of my arm, and he says, "What? You wanted to hit a capo?" And that was terrible punishment. He says, "We nearly finished now. We'll fix you up tomorrow at work." And I knew that they will finish me off by schnell, kicking me. So some reason I went to Willy, because I worked in his commando for a little while as well. But I didn't expect anything. I said, "Willy," and I told him the story. And he turned around. He said, "Line up in my commando tomorrow." And that was a very happy moment in my life. And the next morning I lined up in Willy's commando, and another couple is coming to, here, he wanted to grab me. And then there was Willy, that powerful voice, yelling at him something, and walked away. So that was actually a couple that saved my life. Why he did that, I don't know. To him, I was just a 16,706. Why he do it? But that was a happy moment in my life.
Absolutely. And I think, I know that you were allowed to exchange letters with your mom. And I think that might have been a situation to read the letters and to write the letters to home that perhaps made life for moments a bit easier in the camp.
Did you get any letters from your mother?
Yeah, well, I did, but I could only write that everything is wonderful.
Right to you?
And yes, I think she wrote to me, yes, a couple of letters, but I think she had to be very careful what she can write as well. It was kind of formality, but still the main thing was always to survive. That was one thing that surprised me. That was so easy to commit a suicide. All you had to do is to touch the wires. And it did apparently happen in Neuengamm, but I've never seen it. It could not be very often. And which is surprising that people had a will to survive, no matter how bad it was. They wanted to survive, and so did I. That's why that time when I jumped into the Leichenkammer Commando, I thought, oh no, wonderful, now I won't be evacuated. I didn't know where they're going. We didn't know where they're going. But I didn't want to take chances. I wanted to stay in Neuengamm, and I succeeded, and I left at the last day, yeah. And that saved my life again, because I would not have been survived the Caparcona if I was emigrated sooner. I would have been locked in one of those cabins there, packed. Apparently they were all packed. When we arrived, they didn't know where to put us.
Yeah. You told us about this in your very impressive and wonderful speech, which I had the privilege to translate on May 3, 2010 in Neustadt. And I asked Justin if he could read a passage of this speech you gave us then. And he was happy to do so. So I would like you, Justin, please let us hear what Marian said to us then.
Okay.
So, I was only 20 years old, and I was one of the lucky few to survive on that day. But I feel deep sorrow for the 7,000 people who did not. We all struggled for years in the concentration camp, enduring beatings, constant hunger and fear, degradation, exhaustion from the hard work, and then finally, when freedom was only hours away, only hours before liberation, they perished. A handful survived. I was lucky to be one of them. Why did I survive? I have asked myself that question before. Why me? Luck, perhaps a bit of initiative as well. One of the reasons for my survival was that I succeeded to delay my evacuation from Neuengamm by managing to get into a commando, loading dead bodies from the Leichenkammer and transporting them on the Rollwagen to the crematorium. Therefore, I must have been in the last group to be evacuated. Then we were marched to Neustadt. Exhausted and hungry, anyone unable to walk was executed by the SS walking behind. On arrival on Caparcona, we were hurried down a wide staircase into a huge room that looked like a ballroom or an elegant dining room in a five-star hotel. I don't know how much time passed. I had no sense of time. We sat there without food or water. Then the ship was hit. Panic ensued, and despite the warnings of soldiers on top of the staircase, we rushed forward to get onto deck. The soldiers fired some shots. Some prisoners fell. The surge of the prisoners to the deck continued, trampling over the soldiers. We, the late arrivals on Caparcona, were the lucky ones. The others were locked up in cabins below. Most of them didn't have a chance. Once on deck, I saw the ship was on fire and panic everywhere. A very strange feeling came over me. Despite the gravity of the situation, I experienced a feeling of elation. I felt free. I was no longer a number, no longer a mindless sheep being chased around. I had a will of my own and could use my own initiative. I was like a bird which escaped from its cage. On deck, a young Russian opened a large container of soup, cooked for the SS and the soldiers, and was eating it with a ladle. He said, "If I perish, I perish, but first I will fill up my gut." It might surprise a lot of people, but not those who suffered the gnawing pain of hunger from day to day for many years. There was panic on deck, but the real drama was taking place in the water. Some prisoners had already jumped into the water, floating on pieces of wood or anything they could get a hold of that floated. Others were jumping in and fighting for possession. I saw 3 life rafts in the water. Each was meant probably for one person only. The fight for their possession was brutal and merciless. Gradually, the number of strugglers was diminishing. The 2 life rafts were paddling away, and the sea was swallowing the unlucky ones. It was now or never. Terrified, I jumped into the water, timing it well, and swam to the remaining life raft. There were 4 men on it already. They tried to push me away. I kept struggling, and one of the men said, "Leave him, it will carry 5. The land seemed so far away, and we were hours on the water. My legs, which were submerged in the water, were almost frozen. At dusk, we were finally on the shore. I couldn't stand up and fell face down into the water. Someone helped me ashore.
And I remember very, very good, Marian, how the audience in Neustadt was moved and impressed by this speech of yours. And this is why I very much wanted our audience to hear it. Thanks, Justin, for now. And I would now switch to you, Elizabeth, for a moment, because what I didn't know beforehand, that you were persecuted by you and your family were persecuted by the Nazis too. You were born in Poland in 1939, and 3 years later, when you were very little, your parents were taken to Germany for forced labor, and they took you and your elder brother Joe, who was 5, with you. And you had to work on a farm in Würzburg. And the farmer and his wife were Nazis too, so they didn't treat you well. They treated you and your family very bad. Your parents had to work very hard. You didn't have any education. You were not allowed to go to school to have books or toys, anything like a child would like to have. And then they took your father away. And later, people told you that he had been taken to Flossenbürg concentration camp and being killed there. And when we had our talking beforehand, before planning this event, you told me that you grieve his loss until today, because he was such a wonderful father. And I have a few questions to your time in Germany. When your parents were given the information that they had to go to Germany, did they talk to you and your brother about it? Do you remember explaining that your parents explained what would happen to you in the next future?
No, I don't think they knew themselves what their future would be. And seeing I was only 3 and my brother 5, they didn't explain anything to us. But I could sense, as children do, the trauma around us, because we were told, like, today, tomorrow you're going to Germany, be ready at such and such. So I remember sitting on a suitcase at the station and being put on the wagons and taken to Würzburg. And from there, we were taken to the farm, allocated to the farm. And as I said, it was very unfortunate that the people were Nazis, and they did treat us very badly because my brother and I were only very little children, and we had absolutely no care. My mother and father would get up early in the morning, and my brother and I had to fend for ourselves. And she would just give us a cup of coffee and a slice of black bread. And as soon as we had finished that, she would say, "Raus, raus." So we had to get out and just wander around the village. And then the German children called us Polish pigs, Schweine Polen, Schweine Polen. So, it was a very, very, very frightening experience for a child. And also, just as well, we didn't really get sick, because once I fell and gashed just above my eye, and she didn't even put any iodine on it. So, my eye swelled up, and we had to go to, my mother took me to the convent nearby, and the nuns there attended to it. So we ran around barefoot in the snow, and, our room was never heated, even though it got well below zero there. So we were malnourished. We were not taken care of. We were treated very, very badly. And but the worst came when my father was taken away. That really hit me very hard, because I think I explained, Würzburg was bombed and they wanted people to come and clear the rubble. So my father, actually, I didn't mention that before, but he went there in the first place and was sent back because he had an injury on his foot, which the Sabina didn't call a doctor or even put some iodine on it. He had sustained the accident when they were felling trees or something in the forest. And so the doctor from Würzburg sent him back. But because she didn't want to lose the German laborer that she had, Franz, she accused my father of having done that to himself. So the police came and took him away. And a couple of weeks later, my mother went to the police station in the little town about 3 kilometers away, and she asked the policeman, "Where is my husband?" And he says, "Deine Mann geschossen ward und du und die Kinder wird so." And he showed the, hanging. And so, my mother started to cry, and we walked home, and I thought, being by this time five, I think I was by then, I thought that, well, any time soon we will be hung. But luckily, the war finished before the war. So that was, a terrible experience. And if I can take just a little more time, I used to sit on the windowsill in our room upstairs and look down the road and count with my eyes closed, thinking, if I count to 10, he will come. And when I opened my eyes, and then he wouldn't, so I would count to 20 and 30 and as far as I could, and he didn't come. So that was very, very traumatic for me. So, yes, that was, that affected my whole life because, we would have had better opportunities, my brother and I, if my father were alive.
Yeah, sure. You and your brother and your mother survived, and you stayed in Germany for a while, and after that you emigrated to Australia, your mother and your brother. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know why the decision fell on Australia?
Yes, I know that very well. See, my mother being a widow, she didn't have any opportunity to go anywhere else. With the United States, you had to have some kind of sponsorship. And so when she found out that Australia would take widows, she applied, and we were accepted after fairly intensive tests, medical and interviews and whatnot. And we came to Australia, which was really a very good decision, because I love Australia. And, I've been here now 71 years. I was 10 when we came. And it's a country that has given us opportunities and peace and freedom. So I do appreciate that very much. And my mother didn't want to go back to Poland because Poland was communist by this time. So she felt she had to emigrate somewhere. So that was very good that we came here.
And you wrote a text about your fate in the war and shortly after the war, and your life in Australia when you first came there. And I asked Justin if he could read a passage of your text too, and that's what he will do now. Justin, it's your turn.
Okay, Justin.
I was 10 years old when we came to Australia with my mother and brother, who was 12. We lived in Greta camp for the first 6 years. Greta was a migrant holding centre with basic accommodation in ex-army barracks and communal kitchens where food was provided. My mother worked in one of these kitchens while my brother and I went to school. At first, I went to the school in the camp where the children from many different nationalities spoke German among themselves, as all the displaced persons came from Germany at that time. But after a few months, I was placed in an all-Australian school. Even though this was very good for my education, it was quite an unhappy experience. I suddenly found myself an object of curiosity, as it seems the Australian country girls had not met migrants before, who could not speak English and found my mispronunciations very amusing. Integrating into Australian society was not a problem, as I feel the language was the biggest barrier to assimilation. The Northern European cultures are really not different from the ones found here. So once people learnt English, they felt quite at home. After leaving school at 16, I had to leave the camp and forge ahead on my own. In the meantime, my mother remarried, and it was obvious that her husband would not make my brother and me welcome. At first, I went to Newcastle to find work, which was very easy in these days, and then I came to Sydney. I had a good job and made some friends, went to dances, which were very popular in those days. The one thing I missed very badly was not having a family home, with a mother and father and an extended family, instead always living on my own in a rented room. While working in Newcastle and living on my own, I went to evening college and did my living certificate, now HSC, and then went for 6 months to the Newcastle University to study English and history for a Bachelor of Arts. But I had to give that up, as the stress of working full-time, looking after myself, and going to university at night proved too much. However, obtaining the living certificate was very beneficial because it enabled me to get good jobs.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Justin.
And now
Thanks,
I have... Sorry?
Also, thanks, Mike.
No problem, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a few questions to the two of you, Elizabeth and Marian. First, Marian, after the liberation, you too decided to emigrate to Australia. And I wanted to ask you, why didn't you want to go back to Lviv, or Lviv, as it was called then? Why did you decide to emigrate?
Naturally, see, I was very attached to Lviv, and when the war ended, that would have been the perfect solution for me to go home, to go to Lviv. But naturally, I was in Sikorski army. I would not have been welcome in Poland, communist Poland. So that was out of question for me to go back to Poland. And then, I don't know, I had a choice between Canada and Australia. And I chose Australia. I don't know, just a shot in the dark, and I couldn't have made a better choice. But I had to go somewhere, and my choice was good. Yes, and to start with, if I didn't come to Australia, I wouldn't have met her. I wouldn't have met my darling wife.
And that's what I wanted to ask you. How did the two of you meet?
Sorry?
How did we meet?
Oh, we met at the dance. As I said, I loved soccer, football, and my great love was dancing, ballroom dancing, Latin American dancing, and I won the Australian title in 1963, and that was something also helped me to earn a bit of money because I was running my own school. I qualified and I was running my own school of dancing. Naturally, I used to walk into a dancer. There she was, and it made a great impression on me. Yeah. So I wasn't the youngest. But I was young at heart.
And Elizabeth, how do you remember meeting Marian?
Well, I was at the dance with some friends, and actually, it didn't make any impression on me. We danced, and I could tell that he was a very good dancer. And but then he asked me if I would like to go to a dance with him the following Saturday, and I must have said yes because we ended up going to the dance. But we were just friends, quite a few months. And, we didn't become sort of any sort of relationship of even, holding hands, if I must be specific. So we would go out and to a dance or the movies, and then I wouldn't see him again for a little while, and then he would appear again. And so it went, and eventually, it got more serious, and we got married after about 2 years. I was on 23 when I met Marian, but I had no idea he was by this time nearly 37, because dancing and being so agile and young in his ways, I thought he was about 30 or 28. There you are. He was. He's 14 and a half years older than I. So, yes, that's how it happened. We met at a dance.
This is pretty romantic, I think, meeting at a dance, like in a novel, in a way. Coming back to the experiences the each of you had during World War II, Marian, you didn't talk about your time in German concentration camps for over 50 years. So
yeah, because
it's very interesting that we are meeting here and we are talking in public about what happened to you. Why didn't you want to talk about or tell people about your time in the camps?
Well, the reasons were various. First of all, I always felt when I was talking about it, that used to affect me. And, it was like almost like reliving that situation again. It was no good for my system. Secondly, I don't think there were too many people very interested. And then I joined live. It would have been, if I would have taken her out to dance and dinner and talk about concentration camp, I don't think she would have married. She wouldn't have come on the second date. So
true, Elizabeth?
Probably. But, no, it's not how people didn't talk about. My mother died quite a few years ago, and there are so many questions I would have liked to ask her, but she didn't talk very much about past experiences either. I think people were trying to forget, put it out of their minds.
Yes, I didn't think it was a interesting subject in conversation with anybody, any of people that I was associating with and meeting with. Mostly, the one thing about dancers, the dancers never talk about anything else.
Dancing.
But both of you came from Poland. Both of you knew that that the partner emigrated after World War II and had been born in Poland. So did you never ask the other one what happened to your families or to yourself?
Somehow we didn't. I don't think we did discuss that. We started to speak in Polish, but I found it more difficult to express myself in Polish than in English. So we ended up speaking English all the time, and that's why my children don't speak Polish at all. And we spoke English from the very beginning, and we didn't talk much about Poland and what happened during the war somehow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I would now like to come to you, Mark. Sorry to keep you waiting. But first of all, I wanted to the audience to know what happened to your parents, and I saw you listened very, very closely. Normally, children often ask about the former life of their parents or their grandparents. They ask them what happened when you were young, when you were a child, how was school, whatever. And I think even if you didn't talk Polish at home, you knew that your parents had emigrated to or had migrated to Australia. Did you and Michelle, your sister, ask your parents about their childhood or their youth?
We asked a little bit, and we heard, like, I knew they were, like, my mother spoke a bit more, and about her father was always a big thing that was mentioned. And I knew stuff had happened in the war, but the war was not, you must remember, in Australia is not as big a thing here in the same way. It's a lot more about what happened in the Pacific. And so it's not a topic that would just come up generally. So I'd hear little stories and I'd know about concentration camps, but I didn't really know what they were. I heard about the ship sinking, didn't really know much about it. So the stories that we spoke more about were things like when, you know, my dad had car troubles when he was young, driving terrible cars. So these were the funny stories that would get, fishing stories. So very occasionally would we actually get anything related to the war from my dad, and my mum would talk a little bit more, but yeah, there wasn't that much conversation about that until we started getting a bit older and getting a little bit more interest in it. So I think that really, and I also knew that my dad did not want to talk about it. So any little bit that would come up would be very quickly addressed. And I knew that even things like watching movies, I knew that he really didn't like anything to do with hanging in a movie. So watching something like Papillon, the film, I remember watching that one night, and when it came to the hanging, he just left. It was just like, I'm not dealing with this. So I knew it wasn't the thing to really go and discuss. And it was only later on, like when my daughter was being born, that I felt that this was, there was a feeling that you could discuss this at that point.
So you wanted to have a bit more information when your daughter was born, and did you insist in asking then? So saying, okay, I know there is something in your past and I want to know it now.
I didn't need to insist. It really got triggered when there was I think thanks to internet and everything, I came across a documentary to do with to do with ships. And I'd heard the name the Capicana, and then in this documentary they had footage of the Capicana being shot and sinking, and I was pretty amazed by that. And I said to my dad, do you want to see this footage? And he went, yeah, okay. And we showed it to him, and that started getting him to start talking. And just the more he spoke, I don't know, I guess it didn't bother him in the same way, and he was able to just start talking about it. And then he got interested in writing out his story. And it was always interesting that what he remembered, and what he didn't remember, he didn't remember, but he just had a lot of memories still there, just ready to come out. And it was, it was, I didn't insist or anything. It was just like the point had come where it was okay to talk about this.
Mm. And Marian, how did it feel once starting to talk or starting to writing it down as you did for your family? How does it feel to at least remember and talk about it?
Well, when I started to write my story from the very beginning, so I started with this. The first sentence was, I'm starting to write it, but I don't know whether I would be able to continue. How will I react? So I wasn't too sure. I thought I might not be able to. But by then, already many, many years have passed, and somehow I didn't have particularly any problem to write anymore. I know that there are some things, like I forgot to mention when you said any happy moments. My happy moment was, and I couldn't believe it, when I came on top of a deck at Caparcona, and there were those soldiers, and they stood there, and they were scared of me. And I thought, a moment ago, they were shooting at me. Now they're scared of me. And I felt a feeling of elation. I thought, oh, now I am Marian Hawling, not 16,770. And I'm a human being that can think and do what he wants to do, not being pushed around like a sheep, like by the sheepdog. And I felt so good. It was a great feeling. But then I looked at the sheep, and the reality came back. Now, so I had to start thinking how to survive, yeah. But it was a great moment, yeah.
Yeah, sounds like it. Elizabeth, I have a question to you now. So Marian didn't talk all the time for decades. So how were your feelings when he started to talk, and you realized that he didn't talk to you about his past for the whatever years? So were you angry, or were you happy that you knew now more about his past? Or
well, the very first time I heard about it was when his mother wrote from Poland that he should claim some compensation. And he got very angry about that and still didn't want to talk. But I asked a few questions, and then it came out that, yes, he was in a concentration camp. And that was only a few years after we were married. But I didn't know until then. So that was, and we still didn't talk very much about it. He didn't tell me any details at that time. And it was later on that he started to talk. And I remember once, I'm not sure whether Mark was in the room, but there was some documentary, and there were corpses being shoved into the oven. And Morris said, I did that. And then he started to tell us something and broke down. And so from then on, he did start to talk more about it. But that was years and years ago. I think Mark would have been only a teenager. Do you remember that, Mark?
Yeah, I do. I was watching the World at War.
That's probably what.
And I just remember that scene happening, and you're kind of watching that, being pretty freaked out. And then when you get that comment, it's a bit of an eye-opener. That's for sure. And I knew that there was a lot more behind that hadn't been mentioned probably at that time.
And after all this talking started place, and Marian was talking about his past and Elizabeth was talking about her past, did something change in your family? So a bit more understanding why perhaps people react in a certain way in certain situations. Did anything change? Or Mark, especially my question to you, did anything change in the relation to your parents?
In a lot of ways, no. Like, I don't think that all their past really affected the way our family worked. My dad successfully buried it, and it never really came out in any way. It's not like he had, to us, any big major problems or anything that we could discern. You know, he wasn't an alcoholic. He wasn't doing anything crazy. It was, things were pretty normal. And after things started being discussed, things didn't really change that much. It probably just explained a few subtle things and a few bits of, certain complexities, but I don't know, it just didn't really change that much. Things were surprisingly, when I look back, surprisingly normal. When you hear about what other people have gone through and how their family lives were, seeing documentaries about other people, it's surprising just how unaffected in a lot of ways things were.
Mm-hmm. Elizabeth, do you want to add something to this? What was your feeling to normality?
Yes, I feel that what Mark is saying is perfectly true. But there is one comment that I made actually when we were speaking the other day, that Marian, having gone through this terrible, terrible experience in his life, I think he lacked empathy sometimes, where I would say, oh, such and such happened, oh, this boy is only 15. Oh, I was at war when I was 15, things like that. And I felt that it's probably quite normal to have this diminishing sense of empathy, because if you were so affected by everything that happened to you, he probably had to switch off quite a lot while he was going through those experiences. And psychologically and emotionally, he probably was switched off to a point, and how much he reclaimed of his natural empathy, I feel he did lose some of it.
Some of the little events in everyday unpleasant events were nothing in comparison of the events that I experienced.
That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. That he probably had this comparison all the time. That's not so bad.
Sometimes I might have thought, well, what's the big deal?
Yeah, that's right. It was a lot of things that would perhaps upset me or someone else. He would think, well, what's the big deal about this? But I'm not surprised, because, he did go through a horrible, horrible time.
This nerve-wracking thing in Alexanderplatz, I didn't know what's going to happen to me. And the worst thing was, it was the mental torture everyone. Now and again, I could hear steps, boots of soldiers very early before sunrise in the morning. And I knew that they were coming to pick up someone to shoot him, to execute him. And they were going, and I could hear the steps. And are they going to stop at my door? No, they went past. Oh, what a relief. And then some other time they were walking Oh, they opened the door before they reached mine. Oh, but why? While I had those boots, my stomach was right in my stomach. It was a real torture. And then they come to get me, but they come to get me sometimes about 10, 11 in the morning. So I knew that they're not going to execute me. But I didn't know where I'm going. And then it was Sachsenhausen. And my very first job was, we were testing boots for the Wehrmacht in Russia. Every morning we used to go there, and there was that group I was in. We used to put the boots on and march in them for 10 hours and then take them off. The next morning again, put them on and march for 10 hours. They wanted to test how much will they last, how long will they last. But the problem was only, the bad thing was if you couldn't get yourself a proper pair of shoes that fit you well, that you went through 10 hours of torture through the day. If the shoes didn't fit you. So that was my Sachsenhausen initiation before I took out. Now the trips on those goods trains were deadly terrible. Some people die in it. So it took days to get to Alden. We used to stand for hours on different sidings. I don't know why. And food, there was not, I remember being terribly thirsty. I was leaking when it was raining. I was leaking the water that leaked slightly through the doors. And then people went to the toilet there, and occasionally someone died. And that took sometimes 24 hours before they removed him. The trip was terrible. The trip was terrible, there and back. Yeah, but
Marian, you said after you wrote the things down for your family, and after you talked, the memories were a bit more easier to cope with. So
yes, getting married, that was, we had to start organize the family, provide some accommodation, things, and so I had so many other things on my mind. The family was the priority, which with my early start, I think I've done reasonably well. Yeah, I did provide as much as I possibly could. As much as possibly could, yeah.
And I have another question for Mark. What are you telling your own children, or do your children ask you or Marian or Elizabeth about what happened in the past?
Yeah, they do. And they get the stories. Like even my son yesterday said that, oh, I have to pass on the family name after all this because of what Papa went through. So they're interested in the stories and of both my parents. And I think it's possibly a little bit hard to relate to in some ways now, an extra generation on. But I know my son has quite an interest in history, and once again, thanks to the internet and the amount of history that's on there, so he's showing a lot more interest in the general history and then how it relates to what our family's been through. So I think as they get older, there'll be greater and greater interest in it, just because it's so immediate.
Yeah.
So definitely.
And in 2010, you joined your father, you and Michelle, your sister, joined your father traveling to Hamburg and taking part in the huge commemorations in Neustadt. how do you recall this traveling to Hamburg and going through all these commemorations together? So unfortunately, Elizabeth couldn't join, but Marian and you children, how was it for you to be there?
I think it's like it made it very real in a way, like, you know, like you see a lot of footage and, you know, black and white footage of, you know, Europe during the war and photos. And when you actually go there, even just little things like seeing the trees beside the road and seeing it in colour and going to the camp and just seeing it in the context of, you know, the real canals, the real trees, the real dirt, it becomes something that you can actually relate to, that this was real. It's not, you know, black and white footage. Going out on the boat, it, you know, I've heard the story, you know, I've seen photos, and then when you're actually standing on the boat in that actual spot, looking at the shore, it's cold, it's windy, it becomes real history. And that's when it becomes, something that I could relate to a lot more. And, it becomes very intense at that point. And you can actually understand that, my dad as a very young man actually went through all this. And it happened here. You can't obviously experience what it was like, but you can, it becomes definitely real. So it was a pretty great experience.
Yeah. And Marian, how was it for you to go through this commemoration and the trip on the boat in 2010 with your two children? What feeling did you have?
In 2010.
Oh, that was a great experience, Holly. That was wonderful. I love to have them there. And Michelle came from London. That was great. That was wonderful. Yes. That would not have been. I still missed it. It's a shame. I would love to have that because
in 2005
we were there on the previous experiences, and but it wasn't anywhere near as well organized as the one in 2010. Yeah. There was a different chap in charge then that time, yeah. There was no Detlef and Oliver and Uli. And oh, yes, that was fantastic. That was fantastic. Great experience. And Mark, despite the fact that I know that he was pining after his family because he loves them dearly, he also enjoyed himself.
And we had the impression that it was very, very important for you as a family to be there together, to commemorate together, to do this boat trip together. And all of us were very moved of your closeness and of the speech you held about this. And we all missed you, Elizabeth, although we didn't know you. But your family was talking about you a lot. So,
well, yeah. I wish that I had gone in retrospect. But at that time, I didn't feel that desperate need to go. Actually, it made me very sad to be there. Yeah. And so I thought I'll expose myself to that experience again. But I can see now that it would have been good if I had gone with both the children there.
See, on the previous visit, what I was searching was the spot, where did I come ashore? But everything looked different, and I couldn't find the spot, and I would have loved to see it. And we booked in a hotel. There was a wooden hotel, and we booked in there. And then the chap, because someone rang me, I think Mr. And all of a sudden he found out that I was a survivor, that the owner of that hotel. So he came up to us and he says, look, I was 8 years old And I stood there on the shore and I watched all this drama. And I said, I'm looking for the spot where I came ashore. Well, he says, it would have been somewhere here because the tide was bringing us to the shore more than our paddling. It was the tide, luckily for us. And he said, I said, look, when they pulled me out of the water, there was a wooden shed. And there was a fire there, and they dragged me there. And he says, oh, that was my father's shed. And I said, where is that shed? Oh, he says, shed is gone, but it was standing where the jetty is. And it was about 30 meters from where we were from the hotel. And I could tell exactly where I came ashore. At that point, I took the photo of the spot, yeah. Coincidence that the boy... And that man now owns that big skyscraping hotel. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
May I say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Uli, I must say that with all those experiences, I have often reflected how lucky we are that our children didn't have to go through all that we went through. Yeah. Because when when the war ended, and I think I mentioned that in my notes, and we came out from the cellar there was fighting still. The Americans were there and the Germans were retreating. And we came out of the bunker in the morning and the Germans were waving their white handkerchiefs. And I said to my mother, "Get our white handkerchiefs quickly. I thought the soldiers might shoot us." And she said, "We don't have to. It's the end of the war." You know, Uli, I did not understand what that meant. End of the war, what did that mean? I thought that's how the world was, and that's how it was going to be forever. So the end of the war was absolutely wonderful. It eventually dawned on me that we were free and we would be, taken to a safe place and all that. So I'm glad that my children and this generation did not experience the war any war, and I hope that will continue.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. For now, I would like to very, very, very much thank the three of you for your frankness, for your openness, for sharing your stories with us. And if it's okay for the three of you, I would very much like to give the audience the possibility to post their own questions. And sorry, Justin, I didn't want to forget you. Thank you for your marvelous reading. I received some messages from Dietmar. Perhaps there are some more questions. One question was, what do you think we should pose on to the next generations concerning World War II and the experiences you had? So is it important to give the memories to the next generation? And if yes, what do you want to give to the next generations?
Well, to avoid wars at all costs, that there is no winner in a war. Nobody, particularly this, there will be no winner. So let's hope we can live in peace. But as you can see, there are a few frictions here and there now already. But anyhow, and that's just about all. Avoid wars. Europe did okay, nice and quiet and peaceful. Europe, yeah.
I think that maybe the younger generation possibly don't realize fully because they haven't experienced what war really is, and it's absolutely horrific. So we want to avoid it at all costs.
When you tell someone about it, it doesn't seem as bad.
And that's why talking about it, I hope, has that impression, oh, so this is what people went through during the war. We wouldn't want that to happen again.
You know who is here more aware of it is the Jewish organization. I met a chap by the name of Paul Dexter who was writing a book in search of a father, because father disappeared probably in Auschwitz, and he found out about me, and he thought I might be able to help him. Maybe he was on Caparcona or Neuengamm. And that's how I got to know him. And I was invited to Jewish museum. They got museum in Sydney. I didn't know about it. And when you walk in, there is one wall, is Germany, Poland there, and all those concentration camps are little lights. And because most Aussies only know of Auschwitz. but that's quite, that will be awakening to any Australian to look at all those concentration camps. So I could see that museum, they accumulated a few things that was quite moving, and they are the ones that are really keeping the memories alive and keep going. The Jewish organization, yeah. But
I just saw a question. I'm not sure I understand it correctly, but I will try. Was there a difference in the camps, how political prisoners were treated in comparison to, for instance, Jewish prisoners?
How the political prisoners were treated as against Jewish prisoners. There were no Jewish.
No, there were no. By the time I got to Neuengamm, there were no Jewish prisoners anymore. That would have been easy to detect, but there were no Jewish. There must have, and as I had, there were Jewish prisoners before, and they were transported somewhere. Well, it's obvious they must have been transported to Auschwitz. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but by the time I got there now, and they were, of course, political, the red triangle, and
but you were all treated the same.
But most of the capos were the green triangle. Which means they were incorrigible, crooks, criminals, yeah. But they were homosexuals. They had a big number, 175, I think. But there was no difference even with the nationalities. Kind of even with some I couldn't imagine. I really
question here.
Sorry.
There's another question here.
There are some other questions we mix a bit because now the questions come to different topics. And one question is what you think, Marian, helped you to survive? So what helped you keep your spirits up to give you the strength in the camps to survive?
What helped you to survive in the camp?
In the camps, a will to survive to start with, a will to survive, and particularly the last 2 months when I came from Bremen Farga, from Onkevalenten back to Neuengamm, and when they started the evacuation, I was obsessed. I couldn't sleep at night. I was obsessed. What would I do not to be evacuated? Somehow I dreaded it, and my predictions were okay. And even when I was standing there in my commando that morning, and then I hear a couple nearby, next to our commando, says, "Lager commando here, Lager commando." And in few seconds, 10 thoughts went through my mind, and the next thing, like a dot, I was that commando. And that was the best thing I ever did in my life. I would not have been alive today. And I stood there terrified. And they counting. And this fellow's going one too many, one too other. And "Oh, I'll kill that dog," he says, "der verfluchte Hund." And I'm so scared. And then Lager Älteste calls, and he says, "Well, where is your count?" "Well, schnell, schnell." Everything was schnell. So the Leichenkammer commando, Capo, took the chap that stood next to him from his commando, and with a kick, pushed him to the commando that I escaped from. And now every count was okay. Yeah, run, count okay, in Gleichschritt Marsch. And off we went to Leichenkammer. But that was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. That saved my life.
We have a few before giving you some more questions. We have a few greetings. So some colleagues from the Bremen Fage Memorial are watching and sending their best, and many colleagues from the Neuengamm Memorial are watching too, and greetings, send greetings to you, to Australia. They wanted you to know that they are listening to us and watching. I have another question. What do you think about how Germany handled the Second World War and the Nazi time after the war? So in talking about it, or doing trials against perpetrators and so on, do you have an opinion, each of you, not only
how they were after the war?
How did Germany handle the aftermath?
I think the Germans' recovery was absolutely incredible. I know that Marshall Plan helped a lot, but I still feel the Germans went back into trying to get into the normal life as quickly as they possibly could. As I say, I was attending a dance school in Bamberg. Very, very soon after the end of the war, they already thought about, ballroom dancing. You would think, so the Germans were kind of trying to get, and the football was already going on and everything. They were trying to get it as quickly as possible. And I think they did well. They did well. Whenever I mixed there, wherever I mixed with the Germans there was never, I didn't experience any, prejudice or whatever. But anyhow, but the only thing is, I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to go somewhere, probably far. But as I said, I couldn't have gone any further.
New Zealand.
What makes it difficult at the moment, because we are so unhappy that we can't see you on a more regular basis, because Australia is so far away from Germany. But I think in that time, after having all these experiences in Germany, it was real good for you to just go as far away as you possibly could. to put a space between you and what you experienced. There is another question not only concerning Germany but other countries. What do you think? Or are you afraid because red-wing parties come back to power, for instance, in Europe, and the red-wing idea Nazis are coming back in several countries? Does that make you afraid, or what do you think of it?
You mean alternative party for Deutschland?
For instance, but in other countries too. If you look at France or Hungary, Italian, and so on.
Well, we're trying to watch as much as possible as what's happening in Europe, but we're still looking from a distance. It's still not the same as if you're there, then you can form a much better opinion than, just depending on some news that you can get in here, being so far away. But, don't know.
I think Germany was good in that they never denied anything. And the Nuremberg trials sort of put it on record what happened. And, in a way, because they didn't deny it, there was also that feeling that, they didn't want that to happen again. What happened in Germany was terrible, and they didn't want that to ever happen again. And I hope the parties that might, pro-Nazi parties, realize that destruction that occurred, you wouldn't want anything like that to happen again.
I think it's not as easy as that, Elizabeth, because many Germans pretended not to have been Nazis, although they had been Nazis, and pretended not to have, but were back in schools, like in teachers, at universities, at professors, or in being judges and so on. So it was not as good because people stayed in their positions in Germany the decades after the war, which made it not so easy. So I think it looked better from the outside than it was in the inside, although there were these trials and so on, but they were not really wanted by all Germans. And the real talking about the time and were only beginning when most of the former perpetrators or bystanders were dead, or at least so old that they had no relevant position in Germany anymore. So it was quite difficult. From in hindsight, it seems like it was perfect, but as a historian, I have to say, no, it was not.
Well, I might mention, Uli, that I had my friend Heidi, whom I met here in Australia, and we were very good friends for 8 years, but they returned to Europe. And we visited them in Frankfurt. And I said to Heidi, her father was German, but her mother was Austrian. And she felt quite comfortable in Germany, so people talked to her openly. And I said to her, how do the Germans feel about the war? And she said, many of them think they should have won it. So maybe what you're saying was there, that, we couldn't detect, but apparently it was there that, some people were still pro-Nazi. I don't think there are many now. Would you say there are many people in Germany who are pro-Nazi?
I would say that there are more right-wing or people believing in the right-wing movement, not necessarily Nazis, but there are some, yes.
Yes.
And it's increasing. The number is increasing, perhaps because of the pandemic. They're not happy about, like none of us is, but they are not happy about being imprisoned in their homes, not allowed to go shopping or dancing or whatever. So I think the number is increasing. Yes, unfortunately.
Oh, that's sad. It's very sad.
Yeah.
Marian, I have another a post.
Sorry.
First, please finish, and then I have another remark from a visitor.
Do you have anything to say?
Well, I would say probably anyone who experienced war really would dread it and never want another one. But people that were born after war and they never experienced it at all, and they just heard a bit about, oh yes, there's war, there was war. Well, they could have probably totally different views to the one that really went through it. Yeah. But because that's a horror that you can't really explain in words. Yeah. Mind you, there are a lot of those programs on the TV showing that.
Yeah, we still see a lot of programs on TV here about the Second World War and Hitler and, Goebbels.
And that's really good. That should awake everybody to the fact how terrible it is, and we should never ever have another one.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But then it might not come from Europe. It might not come from Europe, the next one.
we never know. I have another posting, and greetings from Tadea Poljanček. You met in 2010 in Hamburg, and she was there with her father, Miloš, from Slovenia. And she wants me to tell you the following. Dear Marian, first, thank you and your family a lot for sharing your memories with us. It is good to see you full of energy and in a good mood. Now a question. My father was also Neuengamm prisoner, and in last several years, it was rarely a day that he didn't remember or talk about concentration camp and Second World War. How is it with you? Do you often remember those times?
No, not often. I was always trying to chase those thoughts away from me. I wanted, when I walked to the shore and I saw the wreck of Cabarcona, and I thought, now there's a new life starting for me now. And I wanted to join life. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life just live on memories. Oh, how terrible that was, how terrible. Of course it was. Of course it was. There were some terrible experiences. But no, I didn't. And then, when you meet a girl, you fall in love, that takes your mind away from the war. Yeah, then you have a family, then your children are born, and then that also takes the mind away. And so
now there are the grandchildren.
Yeah. And so, yes, that was a great help. Family, that took my mind, the responsibility of providing for the family. That was my main object. Yeah.
I have a question to the three of us, for each of you. And this is if you have a wish or a message for our audience. There are many remarks in the chat at the moment, and we will save them and send them to you. Most of them are political discussions and not really questions to you. But my question to you, to each of you, is: what is your wish for the future, or what do you want from us or from the next generation?
From the organization, from you.
No, not necessarily. But if you have a wish to ask, that's okay too. But the most the question is, what do you wish for the future?
I would like you to continue as long as possible, and even convince the next generation to take over and continue, to remind the world what the Second World was like, and what were the terrors of it, so that I know with very little learned from history, but maybe in this case we might learn from history a bit. So keep what you're doing. I'm always full of admiration for the job you're doing. And I just hope you keep going.
We will.
I certainly hope you, yes. Yes, that's very, very important. Very important. Yeah, tomorrow is the 3rd, isn't it?
Yes.
Tomorrow I'll be thinking, oh, now I'll be the big jump. I made the jump, and also another little story. I took all my clothes off, and I was just wearing a pullover, which I found in a Scandinavian barracks next to us when Scandinavians were there. So I wore it under my shirt. It was better than cement bags. Cement bags were the second best. So all I was wearing was the jumper. I've seen some fellows jumping fully dressed, and they didn't last long. They can't. So anyhow, when they brought me ashore, I was still naked. And then eventually on some truck, I remember, my memory wasn't very clear there. I was driven to the barracks of the German submarine officers, and that's in Neustadt. And so, and they brought me up there, put me there. They were telling me something, but I didn't know what they were saying. And then they left. Too long. No. And then about an hour or so later, I can hear steps marching. And I thought, oh, I go to hide. I wanted to hide from everyone. So I crawled upstairs and I hid myself. They came, I could hear voices coming in. And then they left again. And I managed to get down, and what I found some clothing. So there is someone in Neustadt whose children or grandchildren did a good turn for me. They must have been telling me that they're going to bring me something to wear, but I didn't know what they were saying. So someone was kind enough to give me some clothes to put on.
Yeah. Elizabeth, Mark, do you have any wishes, remarks?
I wish that for the next generation to live in peace above all else. We have achieved so many things technologically. If we can just match that in some way with our humanity and have more feeling for one another, to respect one another and live in peace.
Yeah. Thank you. And Mark?
I guess the thing is, I look at the internet and all the social media and all the absolute rubbish that's on there. That the other thing is that if people are prepared to dig, there's a lot of really good history now that is not just textbook, boring sort of history that people weren't interested in, but there's a lot of very good history that's coming out, and a lot more personal history, which I think people can relate to a lot more. And I know myself and other people who I work with, they were interested in history, people like Dan Carlin and everything. So and I think that's just very important for like what you guys do and how this can go onto the internet and actually go to people and educate people. And especially having a son that's coming up to the age that is the age that people go to war at, you do get very concerned about what the world situation is, and whether any wars are likely. And I think the best way to prevent that sort of all those problems of the right wing and everything is by education and quality history out there and personal accounts that people can relate to. And I think that's very, very important.
I would like to thank the three of you from all my heart. And my wish is that I will see you again soon. If it's not possible to see you in person, then I would like to see you back on Zoom or Skype or whatever, because I'm so happy to have this contact to you. And I promise you that the Neuengamm concentration camp memorial will go on. We will go on doing these events together with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. And even if the pandemic lasts for a while, we will just do digital formats to talk to each other. And my deepest wish is that you stay safe and healthy, not only the three of you and the four of you with Justin naturally, but I see him every day. And that this pandemic will be over soon and that we perhaps can meet in person very soon. And there are lots of thank yous in the chat. I would like to give it to you. So the audience thanks, and I do thank all of you. And now it's evening in your part of the world, and our day only begins. So I hope you have a nice evening and all of us have a fine day. And see you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Uli and Justin and everyone concerned, and to our listeners whom I see there at top. It was good to have this meeting and a pleasure to be able to converse with you and give you this information that what we have experienced. Thank you very much.
Thank all of you. And bye-bye, all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hope to see you soon.
Hope to see you very soon, all of you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.